You look at the Bible, for instance, and all of it, the violence, all of the horror and terror that goes on throughout that book. When you narrow it down into a central message, the red letters that Jesus Christ has even said in his words, that the greatest commandment is love God and then love each other. That's it. If you rip out all of the pages of the Bible or any religious text or whatever, and you get down to a central theme of what God wants us to do, it is lead with love. We can't, and we haven't been able to do that for millennia. And that's what's keeping us in fear. You know, there's a lot of 4-letter words that we use on this show: flow, fear, love, and they all kind of go together. You know, when we experience fear, and I try to share this on this show a lot, fear is not necessarily a bad thing. It's just a feeling. It's a signal to us that something is happening, and it may be a signal that we're in danger. Yes, and if we're in danger, we should avoid that danger. But it's also a signal that we have an opportunity. And a lot of times, maybe that opportunity is that we can lean into love. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Flow Over Fear podcast, where it is our mission to help you to rise above fear and realize your ultimate potential in leadership and life. I'm your host, Adam Hill, and it is my goal to share with you the human side of high performance. My guests share their experience with fear, anxiety, struggle, challenge, and most importantly, despite all of it, how they rose above it to achieve incredible results. So, if you're ready to rise up, let's get started. Hey everyone, welcome to Flow Over Fear. And today I want to talk about something that's deeply personal to me and deeply personal to many of us. And it's something I've frankly been afraid of talking about on this show. And it's the subject of God, the subject of faith. And while I've touched on this in a variety of ways, you know, at a kind of a high level throughout the last 130 episodes, you know, I've touched on the importance of faith in my life and all of that. I haven't really explicitly talked about and its importance and its relationship to fear. In avoiding that, I mean, my purpose in that was because I think inherently I don't want to alienate people. I don't want to alienate people for whom God or the idea of God in any form is a sensitive subject. But ultimately, I think that the nature of this show and shows that want to get to the root of fear and how to rise above it, I have to address the idea of God. We have to talk about the idea of God or a higher power of some kind. And I'm not talking about a specific religious God that we have in this world. I'm talking about a higher power that loves us, that cares for us, that wants the best for us. It's what I believe exists in this world. And, you know, I believe that, you know, that there is a God that loves us, that is taking care of us, that helps us to build a more empowered relationship with fear, that doesn't take away our pain, that doesn't take away our struggles, that doesn't take away our challenges, but is helping us walk through those, that is helping nudge us in the direction of courage, that is helping us to face those things that we don't think we can face on our own and still get through them. And I've seen that time and time again in my own life where I've struggled. And I'll share a little bit about my story and how I came to believe in a God. I think more broadly speaking, this is a subject we need to talk about because we seem more concerned now as a society about taking sides, about pinning ourselves against other people, about polarizing ourselves over things that are just of, you know, that they're of this world. They're not of the message or the will of God. And it's tragic, it's sad, and people are getting caught in the crossfire. And we're all seeing that happening right now. And it's tragic because people who are in power are thinking that they are doing whatever will of God that they have on any side. But really, they're ignoring that primary message of God, which is what I want to share with you today. The message that many religious teachings teach in terms of when they get to the actual letters of what God is trying to tell us. And that is to love. That simple 4-letter word is love. Love. That verb, that action, that thing that we need to do that is so freaking hard because that person is pissing us off, or this person is angering us, or this whole group is completely out of their minds or wrong. That's still what we're being called to do, is love. And when I look throughout history, well, before I even say that, when you look at the religious texts, I mean, you look at the Bible, for instance, and all of it, the violence, all of the horror and terror that goes on throughout that book, when you narrow it down into a central message, the red letters that Jesus Christ has even said in his words, that the greatest commandment is love God and then love each other. That's it. If you rip out all of the pages of the Bible or any religious text or whatever, and you get down to a central theme of what God wants us to do, it is lead with love. We can't, and we haven't been able to do that for millennia. And that's what's keeping us in fear. You know, there's a lot of 4-letter words that we use on this show: flow, fear, love, and they all kind of go together. You know, when we experience fear, and I try to share this on this show a lot, fear is not necessarily a bad thing. It's just a feeling. It's a signal to us that something is happening, and it may be a signal that we're in danger. Yes, and if we're in danger, we should avoid that danger. But it's also a signal that we have an opportunity. And a lot of times, maybe that opportunity is that we can lean into love, as hard as it is, as much as it pins on our ego, as much as we think that we will be exposed or will be less secure or what have you. The greatest teachers in our history, from Jesus Christ to Buddha to Martin Luther King to Gandhi, have all taught us to lead with love. And they paid the ultimate sacrifice, by the way, but they also led that, and it made a difference. That leading with love makes a difference, even though it's counterintuitive. We often find that the solutions to fear, of overcoming fear, require those counterintuitive solutions. And I'm not saying this from a place of thinking that I'm perfect about it at all, as I'm not. I'm wrestling with this every day. I'm wrestling with hearing the same news stories and stuff that's coming out of our world, and all of this terror and shame and horror that exists, and feeling the emotions around fear and feeling the sense of wanting vengeance or justice or whatever it may be. And that's taking me out of that love, because it's just purely driven by ego or the desire to be right over the desire to love. And, you know, I think love being that action word, it's something that we always have to wrestle with, because it doesn't mean that we roll over or we give in to the evil that exists in the world. But it does mean that we can surrender to the love, and, you know, we can fight the greater battles of just trying to love one another. You know, when I first, and I really do believe that is God's central message. It's just love one another. You know, people can disagree. I mean, religious texts, for all that they're worth, written by human beings, they talk about a lot of different things. Sometimes they contradict one another, but stories within each religious text, they contradict each other. But the thing is that each of the central themes is love, if we can just simplify it. So what if we were to ask that simple question in times where we're feeling afraid? What if, instead of taking sides or leaning into, this idea of wanting to be right and just fighting that fear, what if instead we just got curious and started asking questions, leaning into love? When I first found God in my life, I struggled with fear for 30 years of my life. And in that time, I wrestled with the idea of God. I always had this central faith of believing that there was a higher power, because in an infinite universe where anything is possible, where we can't conceive of what exists beyond what we know, which is just a fraction of that universe. How can there not be a higher power? And, in those first 30 years, I wrestled with that because why was I suffering so much with this fear, with this anxiety, with this pain, with this alcoholism? Why are people suffering in the world? Why are there people dying? Why are there so many challenges? Where is God? If there is a loving God, why are we suffering? And I didn't know the answer to that question. And I frankly, I still don't necessarily have the answer to that question. I feel like I have some insights into it at this point, but when I was at my lowest point, when I was in a jail cell after doing something that was so horrifying to me that I never thought that I would do, that I became something I hated. I thought I was pure evil, that I looked for God in the jail cell. And I was able to see him. I was able to witness him, not physically see God, but I felt God in my presence. And it didn't take away the shame. It didn't take away the pain or the horror that I had committed, and it didn't make any of that right just because I was with God. But there was clearly an invitation there, because the other part of me wanted to end my life. The human side of me wanted to end my life and take myself out as a problem out of this world. But I didn't, because I saw the invitation. And the invitation asked me to heal. And it was through that healing that I recognized that finding a higher power in this life, a higher power that loves us, that wants the best for us, that cares for us, that is what can help bring us out of our suffering. It can help. It doesn't do it for us. We have to take the actions. We have to do the work, which is what I did throughout sobriety, going to AA meetings every single day, going to court and doing what I had to do to pay for what I had done, and getting the healing that I needed to do, doing that work, doing the 12 steps, doing it all, leaning into that community, but also leaning into the love of the higher power and loving out loud myself, or at least trying to love out loud myself and lead with love in my own life in the way that I experienced grace. And that's really what grace is this idea that we as human beings have this free will. And this is where my idea of how bad things can happen in a world where God exists, who's all powerful, is that we have this thing called free will. And we have this thing called free will because that in and of itself gives us the resistance on this earth to be able to grow. And just like when you're at the gym and you're working out and you're lifting weights, you get that resistance training to build muscle. That's from a spiritual perspective why on this life we have free will, is to face that resistance, face that struggle, and struggle with it through love so we can continue to grow as human beings. And that means, yes, tragedy exists. That means, yes, terrible things happen. That means, yes, catastrophes happen. Diseases happen. But it also means that we have the opportunity to overcome a lot of that and live into love and grow spiritually and grow closer to God in that process. Some may look at that and think that that's horrifying, that a God would do something like that. I look at it and I'm grateful for the opportunity to pursue that growth and that opportunity, and the opportunity to love amidst so much challenge. What if we all were able to lead with love, even in the face of that horror? I think about people like Martin Luther King Jr. or Gandhi, who faced so much oppression, so much hatred, so much vitriol, that they could have let their ego get the best of them and brought up their fists or brought up their weapons and started fighting and all of that. But through nonviolence, through love, that was the path forward. It wasn't, all lovey-dovey love. It was conflict. It was challenge. It was hardship. It was very hard. It's not easy to love, especially those that are trying to do harm to us. But I think it is the most effective. It's certainly not easy, but when I found my higher power, when I found God, things didn't necessarily get easier, but they did get better. And it was because I was willing to do the work and willing to build a relationship with God that it did. But finding that God independent of all of the conflict, independent of our ego or whatever it may be, it's not easy. And I would challenge anybody that's struggling with that. If you're agnostic, if you're questioning it, just consider that from the standpoint of a higher power, if you have that problem believing that there's a God, I get it. I get that's hard to believe that there's a God. But when you think back on your life, when you think on this universe, start here. Do you believe that you are the most powerful thing in this universe? There is something more powerful than you, right? There's a more powerful force than all of us. As Carl Sagan has presented in his talks, we are just that tiny blue dot in the midst of a vast universe. And amidst there, we have a higher power. For me, my higher power early on in life, the thing that I didn't have control over was alcohol. That was my higher power. My fear was my higher power. Even though I was trying to suppress it or push it down, it was still showing that it was more powerful than me. And that's why when I came out of that, when I started to heal, I had to find a higher power that loved me. I had to recognize that there is a higher power in this universe that I call God, that loves me, that cares for me, that will bring me out of suffering, that won't take hardship away from me, but will walk with me through that hardship and help me to find the other end of it. Because my friends, there is always hope beyond the hopelessness. And I am evidence of that. There are many people in this world that are evidence of that. And I believe that through all of the tragedies that are happening in this world right now, at this very instant, that we can overcome them. We can overcome those, them because they are all based in fear. And we have the ability to rise above fear if we lean into love, if we lead with love, the type of love that the people of God will represent in the world, the true people of God. True people of God being the people that really represent what God's will is, not just the doctrines and the dogmas and all this kind of stuff, but the real words. And those real words are really narrowed down into one 4-letter word: love. Love. So this isn't meant to be a sermon, because I'm not a pastor. This is just kind of, I'll admit this is just the random ramblings of one person's opinion based on what has worked for me and what I've seen in the world. And I really do weep for what's happening right now in this world and all of the suffering, not just in the Middle East, but all over the world. We have a mental health epidemic that is happening in this world that is more broad than just the generalized anxiety or low level depression that people are experiencing. There is a deep and secret suffering that is happening within the world of mental health, and it's tragic. And if we can lead with love on that, if we can lead with love on these things and do so, face the hard things, then we'll have the ability to overcome that fear that we may be feeling and maybe experience some greater grace not perfection, but greater grace. And a relationship with God, in my opinion, can help us to rise above that fear. So I really do hope that if you're questioning that, if you're agnostic, or even if you don't believe in a God, I would just challenge you to get curious about that and really question it. Don't feel like you have to lean into a specific religion. Just ask the questions about God and maybe send out a prayer or two and, see if you can start to build that relationship with God again. Now, my hope is that if you're listening to this and you feel alienated, that was not my intent. I just hope that it helps to bring a little bit of curiosity, to bring one person's opinion to it, and helps shed some light on how we can rise above fear. And, things are not going to be perfect in this world. Things are not always, there are going to be tragedies that exist. We're not going to reach kumbaya. That is the real challenge of a world where free will exists. As with, the American project or experiment that we have here, freedom requires responsibility, and freedom also has its sacrifices. Free will also has that, and they're painful, they're tragic. But we can also find grace in that when we build a relationship with God amidst the free will and recognize that God is not causing us suffering. God is leading us through it. And if we lead with love, we can follow God in the right way. I hope this message finds you well, and I hope you find blessing. Thanks for joining me today. See you soon.
Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to the Flow Over Fear podcast. If you'd like to learn more about getting into flow and learn the foundations of flow, I have a free video series on my website at www.adamcliffordhill.com called The Foundations of Flow. Feel free to go there and download it and start your journey to rising above fear and achieving greater flow in your life. And if you like this episode, and I'm guessing you did if you stuck around for this long, then please do me a favor and hit the subscribe button, and you will receive notifications when I have new interviews, new recaps, and new trainings that pop up on YouTube. Thanks again for joining us.